Keith does have a good message. Yes. Clap for him. Be reading from Joshua 4, verses are 1 through 9. It's the Common English Bible. If you guys want to turn to that. It's the 12 stones at Gilgal. When the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Pick 12 men from the people, 1 man per tribe. Command them, pick up 12 stones from right here in the middle of the Jordan, where the feet of the priests have been firmly planted. Bring them across with you, and put them down in the camp where you are staying tonight." Joshua called for the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, 1 man per tribe. Joshua said to them, "Cross over into the middle of the Jordan, up to the Lord your God's chest. Each of you lift up a stone on his shoulder to match the number of the tribes of the Israelites. This will be a symbol among you. In the future, your children may ask, 'What do these stones mean to you?' Then you will tell them that the water of the Jordan was cut off before the Lord's covenant chest. When it crossed over the Jordan, the water of the Jordan was cut off. These stones will be an enduring memorial for the Israelites." The Israelites did exactly what Joshua ordered. They lifted 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, matching the number of the tribes of the Israelites, exactly as the Lord had said to Joshua. They brought them over to the camp and put them down there. Joshua also set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan where the feet of the priests had stood while carrying the covenant chest, and they are still there today.
Thank you, Drew. I told Drew that he's my George Beverly Shays, Billy Graham, and his guy that sang and travel. We're talking in a few minutes here about stones of remembrance, but the things that happened in the weeks past, I found an excellent post by Reverend Emily Heath. She said things that you probably shouldn't say to grieving parents, and I was thinking about the children. And many times we don't know what to say. We'll say things, sometimes we don't know the words, but I thought these were good in a situation maybe where anyone's grieving. Things you probably shouldn't say. God just needed another angel. Thank goodness you have other children, or you're young, you can have more kids. He or she was just on loan to you from God. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. We may not understand it, but this was God's will. And here's some things that would probably be better to say. I don't believe God wanted or willed this. It's okay to be angry, and I'm a safe person for you to express that anger if you need to. It's not really okay. I don't know why this happened. I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here to support you in whatever way you feel best. And he gives an example from the book of Job. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all these troubles that come upon him, each of them set out from his home, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They met together to go out and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept aloud. They tore their robes and threw their dust in the air and on their heads. And here's the part that struck me. They sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw his suffering was very great. That's from Job 2:11-13. And that's, you can find it on our Facebook page if you like. Yeah, I don't want to share it. Little signs. A wise person once said that history should be a guiding post and not a hitching post. There's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? As times go by, we tend to remember the best from the past, forgetting the not so good, and maybe try and completely forget some of those other foolish things we've done back in the good old days. Of course, that was before we became older and wiser. Someone once said, it's probably Vicky to me, that it's never too late to have a happy childhood. But we see things repeating themselves. We see fashion repeat itself. Vicky and I were doing some Christmas shopping at, I guess it was the mall and Sears, a couple places. Remember the big orange nylon vests and jackets of the 70s? They were everywhere. I didn't know what year it was. But everything seems to repeat. And I mean, you can see some of the pictures I've posted lately. We've definitely changed, and there's usually more of us than there was at one time. And we look at some of the things like, wow, I thought 31 was old when I had that picture taken. And we can see history repeat itself in church trends. Trends may come and go. Worship styles might change. Now, I personally don't think it matters what your worship style is. The main thing is that whatever it is, that it is a routine thing and that it centers on God and worshiping Him. And then there's some things that don't change. The wise 1980s philosopher Jack Handy that often quote said, "Probably the earliest fly swatters were nothing more than some sort of striking service attached to a long stick." That's so good. But as we look at Joshua today, we see that Joshua wanted the people to remember the past and what God had done for them. Remember when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea? God came through mightily for them. Yet later in the desert, they were complaining because they were eating the same thing every day.
Right.
And said, well, we had it better back when we had the food when we were slaves. They forgot about all the other part that went with it, how they labored day and night. You see, human nature doesn't really change that much, does it? But God was working a miracle again when He allowed them to cross the Jordan River on dry ground. Joshua knew that only those who saw the incident would remember it. He wanted to leave a legacy for the next generation so they'd have a thing to remember it by. John Maxwell calls this the handles Joshua gave them to remember things. Anybody remembers the handles from the CP days? People had a handle or something that we knew them by. But Joshua wanted to communicate a way, create a way that God's greatness would be remembered by the children and passed on, even those that hadn't been born yet. He devised a plan called the Stones of Remembrance. One of the questions I'd like to ask today, are we in this generation leaving these stones of remembrance to our children and grandchildren and for the next generation today? So we might look at this for a few minutes today. What are our stones of remembrance? What will we consider them? What principles and worldview do we use to guide our lives?
Right.
Are we as a church passing on important things to our children and the next generation? Do they have something that to help them remember that God doesn't change? And these are just questions we can ask ourselves and think about. If not, then will they only remember the world's ways and the secular ways and the way that society does things? What will they pass on to their children and grandchildren that we have or haven't passed on to them? We hear a lot about worldview, but worldview really does matter. What we think about heaven and what we think about hell, what we think about eternal destiny. We can see this in the suicide rates, especially in our area. I'm sure they must have some kind of effect. We can see the tragedies like the school shooting in Connecticut, and everybody will look at all the external things, and the media will, where it be guns, mental illness, all these things that can be a factor, but the primary thing is the worldview of the generation coming up.
Right.
I believe it's that Ken Ham that said we teach them in school that they came from monkeys and animals and wonder why society acts that way. But when there's no moral absolutes, we see these things happen, and it just seems to constantly get worse. Yes, Satan is alive and well on planet Earth, and I believe he does use these things to his benefit and to bring us down, but we know someone that's greater, more powerful than Satan, don't we? So what can we do as a church? How can we ensure the next generation realizes what's really important, what's going to give them the bedrock and guide their lives? How can we pass these values to our children? I don't profess, of course, to have all the answers to the questions I'm asking. But I do believe that the Bible can give us all the answers that we need. We can look at some of these today. If anybody's noticed, probably some of my favorite commercials, the car insurance commercials. They have Flo and Norm Macdonald and all the different ones. It seems like since Progressive started, all the others have to come up with a better car commercial. Remember the one with the rocket scientist? Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that our education system in today's society is in shambles. Our educators, many of them, not all of them, have completely forgotten the values and Christian values that guided our nation in the past. We have what we call revisionist history, where history's changed. There's a movie came out about Lincoln I kind of like to see, but yet I'm afraid to because I wonder what they've changed from the past. And when these things aren't taught or passed down, most will believe what they hear at the time. We can see that the stones of remembrance of the divine creator crumbled into the rubble of Darwinism and evolution.
Right.
What